The grand finals for 2020 are this weekend. 32 players are going to be fighting over $250,000 standard style, baby. We've got 16 players from the Players Tour Finals and 16 players from the 2020 Mythic Invitational that are going to be duking it out this weekend with the top decks in standard.
Standard style. Today we're going to talk about the decks that are most likely going to be dominating the format moving forward and what cards should be on your radar if you want to counter those strategies. The video starts right now.
Special thanks to our Patreon supporters who power our channel. Check out our Patreon for monthly giveaways, exclusive content, and even a starring role in our fan fight series. Link in the description below.
Hello and welcome to the day.
Thank you for spending your time with us.
I'm Jake.
I'm Joel. Welcome back to another episode of Jake and Joel Are Magic. We're going to talk about the standard meta for the beginning of October leading into the grand finals of 2020. But first, if you would, go down there and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you like the video by the end of it. Really helps us out.
It's the best way to support the channel with just the click of a button. Let's go ahead and get into it.
So heading into the weekend, obviously everyone is still under the shadow of Omnath. Uro was banned very recently, and Omnath is still here, all four arms, just absolutely powering the format. Currently, the main version of the Omnath deck is Adventure Omnath, and so you've got a deck that is the Teamer Adventures deck with Lucky Clover, Edgewall, Innkeeper, these kinds of cards, but they have put Omnath into it, and that makes the deck better. I mean, obviously,
Omnath
right?
kind of at the helm of what is like just this deck that is already very explosive. And again, you do need to get the Edgewall Innkeeper, you do need to get the Lucky Clover, but once you have that online, I mean, you're drawing a lot of cards, and we all know in Magic the Gathering that velocity a lot of the time will be enough to win the game, and then the inevitability of Omnath coming at the end of all of those draw spells. I mean, it just kind of puts you in this situation where it's like your back is against the wall as soon as you know you're playing against it, and then very shortly after that you are already drowning and you don't even know when it started to happen.
Yeah, obviously the pieces have always kind of been there for a while on the Teamer Adventure list, Edgewall, Innkeeper, Lucky Clover being the base, and then you've got Bonecrusher Giant, Beanstalk Giant, these kinds of cards that form kind of the middle of it. Lately, though, I haven't really seen this, but I've in the past, but lately I've seen 4 of Fae of Wishes in the deck and a wish board for their sideboard, and so the deck itself doesn't really change. To beat it, you really have to disrupt it early so it can't spiral out of control. It's really when that Lucky Clover gets on the battlefield, goes unanswered, Innkeeper's out, you're drawing cards from the spells that you've already gone on adventures with. It just gets so out of hand when they're double Bonecrushering, double, Brazen Borrowing, double Bonecrusher, let's
kind of break this deck down for a second and talk about the kind of cards that are really standing out before we even get to Omnath, which are these cards where you are doing an instant or a sorcery, and then later on you're getting a body. And on Fae of the Wishes, you can return it to your hand. You're going to get to do it again if you have built the deck right. And, you're going to have so many cards that discarding 2 cards is not going to be difficult in this build. I just think we need to really realize as Magic players what kind of cards are going to be impactful moving forward in these formats. I have been a huge fan of Bonecrusher Giant ever since the card came out. I saw it, I was like, the 4/3, you play it straight up against certain decks, that's a threat that they need to answer.
Right.
Having that 2 damage is just like, that's so powerful as well to any target. I mean, let's go, dude. The card is just fantastic. And now people are jamming them all together, and they're saying, and I mean, Brazen Borrower, we don't even need to talk about it. Murderous Rider, we don't even need to talk about it. These are all cards that are tried and true. And, yeah, I'm not surprised, jam them all together. You're getting 2 things out of every card. You're getting an effect now and a body later. I mean, I don't know what's not to like.
Yeah, it's versatility. Murderous Rider's in a different deck that we're going to talk about a little bit.
Sure,
but all of the Teamer cards, you're absolutely right, man. It's the versatility. There's a joke going around online right now that right now standard is Eldraine. And it's not that far off because of the power level of some of those cards. You've got Embercleave cards like this that are incredibly just format warping. And you've got all the adventure cards that are super versatile. Always going to have those 2 modes that you can play. Let's talk about the second big deck in the meta right now. And that is mono green on the back of Gem Razor. Gem Razor's a 4 of in these decks. You've got early creatures. You've got Stonecoil Serpent. You've got the new 1-drop that splits into 1/1s if it gets targeted. Then you've got tested true cards, Lovestruck Beast, you know, Yorvo, these big beaters. The big standout card, and I've mentioned this in our standard meta videos before, is Primal Might. This card, I think, went under everybody's radar as to how good it is, but then people started playing it, and now it is one of the best removal spells in the entire format, in my opinion. I mean, it can be a 1-mana fight at sorcery speed, or it can be a game-winning card later down the road. We were just talking about versatility on adventure. You can have versatility because of an X in a spell. Obviously, it may play 2 different roles, being early and being late. Luckily, this one, because of that second sentence, then fight up to 1 target creature you don't control. 1 mana is a viable use of this card. Also, 10 mana is a viable use of this card.
Dude, it is easily a 2-for-1 kind of card, because in a certain situation, you know, you have a big threat on the battlefield, your opponent has 2 big threats, they're about to be at lethal, but you need to clear these creatures. So now all of a sudden you're casting Primal Might, you're killing one of the creatures, but now you're swinging through and you know that they need to block because they're in lethal range. And in just a moment before, they had you against the wall because they were about to start swinging with their big creature and leave 1 for backup and blocking. But now all of a sudden Primal Might has turned this game around completely.
That's right.
You've removed one of these things, you know, you can just sink all of your mana into it, and it's not like it just goes on attack, it goes on toughness as well. It really is a very good card, and it is kind of innocuous, dude. Right off the bat, you're like, sorcery.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I pulled this green sorcery, I didn't pull a planeswalker. But now, yeah, it is a very good card, and, you know, I'm not surprised that people are playing it to great effect. And like you said, 1 green to trigger the fight.
Yeah, that's I think where the power of this is. Its floor is good, and its ceiling can be great. For all the reasons that you highlighted. That's the second deck that's got a lot of, you know, play share in the meta right now. The third deck is a control deck. There's 2 different versions of this. The Rakdos Control, which has been more popular, I would say, in the last 4 to 5 days on the ladder, and the Grixis Control, which was like the last week or, you know, week before last week, was really tearing it up. The Rakdos trades out the control magic, all of the counter spells, for more of just kind of like brute force removal and damage, and the Grixis Control kind of takes that stuff by the side for a longer game so that they're just constantly sort of board wiping, countering, returning stuff, you know, that runs Ashiok, these kind of control-y cards. I personally like the Rakdos one, though, the most, and that's what we're going to talk about. It runs on Magmatic Channeler, which is a 4/4 for 2, as long as there's 4 instants or sorceries in your graveyard, and you can tap it to discard a card, to exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them, and you can play it this turn. So it's velocity and a 4/4 for 2. This card is just insane.
Yeah, it's really easy to get those 4 instant or sorceries in the yard, unless you're playing against something that's exiling the graveyard or anything like that. That's what we're talking about. Mana efficiency, and in standard, if you can realistically depend on having a 4/4 for 2 that is also going to dig and find you those answers that you need.
There are good enough removal spells right now at 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana, 4 mana that you will just be able to curve out beautifully as you're playing your other cards and spells, that you don't really have to rush to get this to be a 4/4. It just wonderfully turns out to be one. It's got the velocity built in early. It blocks really well early on against some of the 1/1s and 2/2s and things that are getting played in the format.
Yeah, 1 3 for 2 is good by itself.
Exactly. Yeah. And so in a control-ish deck, which these aren't, you know, burn them down, go fast as possible, curve out decks. These are remove the key threats, you know, disrupt, slow them down, empty their hand. They run out of velocity, and suddenly we've got a late game Kroxa, which is the other big card in this deck that you can pull out and turn on. But I mean, it all all runs on the back of this. I love this card. I can't talk about how much of a house Magmatic Channeler is.
I was a big fan of it the very first time I read it. I pulled one in a box opening and I read the card and I remember being very impressed by it. And I'm not surprised that it made its way into a control deck. That's where the card seems to fit. And Kroxa, this is a card that, like Uro, has been oppressive in its own way, but it doesn't run alongside Omnath, so thankfully it was able to dodge a ban, unlike Uro. Yeah, another good card that's very, very strong. A lot of discard, so card disadvantage for your opponent, and again, inevitability. Play it now, get an effect, play it again later, get a huge, huge beater. This is the exact kind of engine and exactly what you want in a control deck.
It's inevitability. I swear I've seen a lot of decks beat this deck. A lot of decks beat by this deck that they just are out of cards in their hand, and Kroxa gets played. That 3 extra damage plus that turn's attack is what does the winning blow, you know?
Oh, dude, and it's a bummer playing against it because you have to start thinking about things like, well, I need this card,
right?
But I actually need mana. But then you're like, well, hopefully I draw a mana because I need this. I'm going to pitch a mana, and then all of a sudden you draw another spell. And so you just start playing poorly against it. Like, playing against it and being behind against it, it's very, very hard to get out ahead and very hard to turn the tide against somebody who's playing it on curve, and multiple times it's just, you're gonna lose.
So Omnath Adventure, Mono Green, Beats, and Rakdos or Grixis Control. I would say we're gonna see a lot of these decks this weekend. There always are those pros that surprise us with some cool meta thing, but I do expect to see a lot of these kind of decks at the grand finals. So let's talk anti-tech for these decks. Some of this is going to be main boardable, a lot of it's going to be sideboard, but these are the cards that are going to play best in the meta to counter some of these strategies. And Jake, we're starting with a main deck card. 4 of Bonecrusher in every deck that has red has become standard. It is a 2-mana instant speed shock that leads into a 3-mana 4/3 with downside if it gets targeted removal. I mean, this card is such a house. It hits early green creatures in the mono green deck. It hits Innkeeper. I think in the mono green deck specifically, hitting Scavenging Ooze, which we're going to talk about later, before it can start to get out of hand, is in and of itself a huge benefit of this card. I just can't, and I know, Jake, you've said everything there is to be said about this card, but this one continues to come up as one of the most played cards in Standard.
I'm telling you, man, and I think its reach is outside of Standard as well. And I know that it's played to good effect in Pioneer, but I think this is one of those cards that down the line, a lot of formats, I think it could make its way into Modern, but it really just has to do with that versatility and getting 2 effects on a card. And the 4/3 that comes for 3 is nothing to shake a stick at. Like I've said before, I've played this in a lot of situations, and sometimes when the control deck taps out, you just like play this straight up, you skip the 2 damage, and you get the 4/3 out there, and it really can throw off the tempo of the game for the opponent, because now they're going, well, wait a minute, I was gonna do this, but now I feel like I should probably blow up the board just to like get out ahead of this. And so it's one of those cards where it's really, really, really versatile, and I do think that down the line, this is one of those cards that people are just gonna, I think they're gonna continually flock to it in Eternal formats. I'm 0% surprised that this card is on this list today. I really do expect this card to continue performing in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that it kills Innkeeper and it kills Snake and it kills so many of these early threats, Scavenging Ooze, that can get out of hand but are just they're necessary to answer. This has become the go-to. You know, people were running the 1 mana, 1 damage, exile the thing that dies card because Uro was still in the format. Yeah, that was still in the format, but that one's kind of fallen off to the wayside because the adventure deck doesn't really need the Snake. It's got the Innkeeper instead to fill the hand up, and it doesn't want the mana ramp so much as it wants to play the Innkeeper and protect its Clover. And so Bonecrusher Giant has moved to the forefront. The other card that I've seen move to the forefront, and this is a sideboard card, but with all the green decks running around right now, strangely enough, another Eldraine card, this this time at Uncommon is splashing around as a 2 to 4 of in so many decks right now. Definitely the mono green decks. Some of the Omnath decks I've seen running it. Okame Adversary, because it costs 2 less if they control a green permanent. It's got Death Touch, so you have a 2 cost 2/3 with Death Touch, and if it deals combat damage, you get to draw a card. And so it allows you to stay on pace with some of these really rampy, really card drawing decks. It shocked me the first time I saw it in sideboards. I went, really? An uncommon? Okay, what are we looking at here? But yeah, it's the Death Touch, it's the drawing cards, it's the versatility, it's the mana efficiency at 2 mana for 2/3. This is a sideboard card you need to be considering if you're not already running.
And it's one of those cards where you showed me this card and I was actually surprised as well. But if you are reliably playing it for 2 mana, then yes, it's very good and definitely notable.
There is a card, Jake. This one is the most innocuous card on this entire list. I 100% guarantee it. And that's Shredded Sails. This card hits 3 specific cards in the meta, in my opinion. Let me know in the comments if I miss one of the cards that this hits and hits hard. But at instant speed, we can destroy the Clover. We can destroy at instant speed an Embercleave. And we can deal 4 damage to target Terror of the Peaks at instant speed, and if we don't need it, we can just cycle it. Here's another example.
But also Great Henge. You left out Great Henge.
Oh my gosh, it is 4 cards. Great Henge, Clover, Embercleave, and it'll hit the Terror of the Peaks. Jake, you're right there. You know what you're talking about. Shredded Sails, it again also represents versatility
as well. So yeah, so definitely a very good card, and it's one of those cards that you know, you grab it if you're playing cycling in draft in Ikoria. You know, it's one of those where it's just like, I need another cycling card for my Drannith Stingers and my Drannith Healers and all of my Drannith Tap It Downers and all of my Drannith You're Gonna Die by a Zenith Flares. Again, it's one of those things where you don't need it, cycle it away. We really don't need to go super far into it, but yeah, in certain situations, it's going to be very strong. And for me, I could see it being a little bit main boardable. If you are going into this tournament and you know, I'm going to be playing against this in the air, I'm going to be playing against for sure this on the ground, I'm going to be playing against for sure a Great Henge, I know that I'm going to need to deal with Lucky Clover, just run it in. Just run 4 of them, cycle them away if you don't need them, get used to having them in the deck, because you're never going to hate having them, having this card in those certain situations. And the fact that you can get rid of it is why it's on the list at all. Yeah, we don't need to talk about cycling.
Yeah, honestly, that is why it's on the list. You're right. I don't know if it's a 4 of in sideboards that need it, but you know, it's, you know, find the number that works for you. Another really powerful creature that has been bouncing around on the sideboards is Garruk's Harbinger. With the amount of Grixis control that we were seeing about 2 weeks ago, heading into the beginning of last week on the ladder, this card became invaluable in the green decks. And now that Rakdos Control has become the, you know, another alteration, I'll say, of Grixis control, you've still got most of those removal spells for once stuff has hit the battlefield. The color is black to get those spells cast, and Garruk's Harbinger can't be targeted. Plus, it represents some velocity, putting creatures and/or Garruk Planeswalkers, which you don't, you know, very often do, but putting creature cards into your hand from your library. This card 4/3 for 3. I mean, it's that converted for the Bonecrusher Giant too. 4/3 for 3, man. It gets it done.
Yeah, it's funny because whenever I look at old cards from different sets, I'm just like, oh, it's so narrow. Hexproof from this. I bet it never got played. But no, I mean, it's enough. If you know the meta well and you have a good idea of what you're playing against, that's when we really see cards like Garruk's Harbinger start to float to the top. And people are like, ooh, what is this?
Right.
This might actually be good. So yeah, I think the card is really strong.
And then the last card for sideboard is, obviously, we've talked about this one for a couple of weeks now,
and
but
mainboard.
Scavenging Ooze, yeah. For the most part, I've seen the good beady green decks running 2 mainboard, 2 sideboard. Just in case you do run into one of the Rakdos or Grixis control decks. Not a lot of graveyard recursion in the Omnath deck anymore because Uro's gone. That's essentially the card that was doing it in that deck. But with Kroxa, with some of the rogue decks running around, you know, that maybe aren't in the top 3 or 4 decks, but they're still going to be there, especially on ladder, Scavenging Ooze can really help you out with those decks. I've seen players eat their their own graveyards so that their rogues are powered, the opponent's rogues are powered down, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It's a card that's been played in Modern to great effect. It's played in Standard to great effect. Essentially, that's like the test. It's like, is it played in Modern? Is it played in Legacy? Well, then, yes, it's probably good enough for Type 2. This card is very, very strong. And the inevitability,
with the throwback, dude. I don't think I've heard it called Type 2 in a while.
But no, sorry, the inevitability of Scavenging Ooze as well, being able to eat your own things and make it big, you know, it's kind of scary to opponents. If you don't have removal for it, you just know that it's going to get out of hand. I've played against this card enough to where it's just like, oh, the ooze. The ooze is grown,
I don't have an answer for the ooze in like the first 2 or 3 turns.
Now it's 4 power. Now it's 5 power. Oh god, I can't bounce the ooze. And then eventually it just eats you. The ooze devours you.
Right.
Kind of crazy. Originally printed in Counterpunch in 2011, and this was the only place that you could get this card. If you didn't know that, you do now. This was originally printed in the very first Commander set. Was Commander 2011? I think those were the first sanctioned products. Yeah, that's the first time we saw Kalia and everything.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, Scavenging Ooze.
This is the standard meta for the first week of October. Let's close the book. Thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it. We will be watching the grand finals this weekend. Can't wait to talk about what the standard meta does during that tournament. I mean, we've literally got 32 of the top players right now are all going to be battling it out over a huge prize pool. I can't tell you how many streamers, pro players I've seen prepping for this tournament over the past 2 weeks have gone dark lately. I know that like Gabe Nassif in particular, for example, just went dark on Twitter and not streaming, and he's backing away to do his final preparations, relax up, and get ready for this tournament this weekend. And so I know it's going to be a good time, dude. It's very exciting to see a meta that is fairly healthy. You know, Jake has seen the statistics. We didn't bring them up, but Omnath decks, you know, 55, 56% win rate. That's a huge sample size with all of Arena, obviously players of all levels. And so we'll see what kind of rises to the top, like Jake said. But it is interesting to go into this into a fairly healthy standard format where 2 weeks ago, I don't think we could have said that.
Yeah, what deck do you think is going to take it? Do you think it's one of the decks that we covered today, or do you think there's going to be something disruptive, something that maybe we haven't seen, or actually, what are you playing that's beating all of these decks? We would love to hear about that as well. So let us know what you're playing, let us know what you think is going to win, and let us know what you think of this current meta. We want to hear about it.
Absolutely. YouTube stuff, hit that like button, that subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it. Let us know if you want to keep covering this, if you want us to keep covering the standard meta. This is our probably 3rd, 4th video in this like covering it week over week series at this point. Having a lot of fun following it for you, and we'd love to keep doing it. But let us know if you want to see it. If you want to support us further, we have a Patreon. The link is down in the description below. Lots of fun over there. Discord access, behind the scenes stuff, giveaways all the time. Go check it out and see if you're a good fit. Other than that, Jake, I'm tapped out. Let's look forward to the grand finals, baby.
Until next time, I will be playing Mill in Historic, and Joel will let me know what happens in the grand finals. We'll talk to you soon.